From the Daily Catch, this is The Catch Up. I'm Daily Catch editor Emily Sachar. Last year, Red Hook's wastewater treatment plant was one of the biggest stories in the village. State violations piled up, residents worried about pollution flowing into the Sawkill, and many questioned whether village officials had lost control of the system. Today, the picture looks quite different. Operators say the plant is performing better than it ever has after months of repairs, new management, and major operational changes. But just as one crisis appears to be ending, another challenge has emerged. Village officials now say their ambitious $28 million expansion won't move forward unless millions more dollars in grant funding come through. Joining me today are Daily Catch reporters Claire Greenberger and Athan Yanos, who have been covering both the plant's remarkable turnaround and the uncertain road ahead. It's the week of July 27th. Claire and Athan, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you as always, Emily, for having me.
I'm so glad we have both of you to lean on today. So Claire, let's start with you. Where was this story a year ago? How bad were conditions at the plant? Bring us back to that moment in time.
So, about a year ago, when I first toured the plant, things were in pretty rough shape. In the weeks leading up to that visit, I'd been pretty obsessively searching for and combing through years of DEC permit violations, which I'm sure you'll remember, Emily. So, on paper, I knew, the system was in trouble, but I was curious whether, as someone who had thankfully spent very little time in wastewater treatment plants before covering the story, I'd actually be able to, see the problems for myself at the plant. And I was surprised to find out that actually visually I was able to tell the facility was struggling. The biggest thing, first and foremost, was that one of the plant's two treatment systems wasn't operating at all. So that was pretty clear, even to my untrained eye, that things were not functioning well. And then walking through that facility with a flashlight, because it was kind of dark in there, I could see pretty extensive rust damage on a lot of the parts and components of the plant. So it was clear that it was, really aged and quite a bit of disrepair. And as we walked through, village engineer Robert Flores, who was guiding me through the facility, just pointed out what seemed like an endless list of repairs that needed to be made just to get the system functioning reliably again. And at that point, I'll also say it didn't seem like there was a clear understanding of what the underlying problem was. There were a lot of things that needed to be fixed and a lot of work ahead, but I didn't feel like they understood a single root cause there wasn't a single root cause that everyone had identified.
Mm-hmm. So you and Athan spent considerable time touring the facility recently and speaking with the people now running it. What impressed you the most, Claire, about how dramatically operations have changed?
Yeah, Athan and I went back to the plant together at the end of June, and a lot has changed. The village and the new operators have put a lot of work into turning this plant around. The biggest difference from when I visited last year is that the older treatment system, which wasn't operating at all during my first tour a year ago, is now back online and treating wastewater again. That's probably the most dramatic change. But there have also been, dozens of smaller improvements. The operators have stabilized the biological treatment process, and much of the equipment that wasn't working last year has been repaired or replaced. For example, when I toured the plant last year, the UV disinfection system wasn't working. So they were using these chlorine tablets as a temporary substitute. But now the UV system is back up and running as intended. One other thing I'll say, which is perhaps equally important to the equipment fixes, is that over the last year, the operators seem to have developed a really deep understanding of this plant, and at this point just seem to have like a total grasp over how it functions. And it's, absolutely a faulty plant and a quirky plant, but they know it very well. And in that way, they seem to be more in control of operations.
Really good to hear. And we were, of course, we should mention for our listeners, we were invited back to tour the plant this year. And we really appreciate the openness that the village has given to us to tell this story for our readers. Um, Claire, one of the biggest breakthroughs involves something most people had never heard of before. I had never heard of it, the equalization tank or the EQ tank. Can you explain what that does and why planning to fix that issue matters so much?
Yeah, so the equalization tank ended up being one of the biggest discoveries in this whole story. I also did not know what an EQ tank is before this, but basically, an EQ tank is a holding tank that temporarily stores wastewater when large volumes come into the plant at once, like during the morning rush of showers and wastewater use, and then releases it gradually into the system so that the system isn't overwhelmed. But the existing EQ tank at the village plant, it turns out, is much too small for the amount of wastewater the village now receives. And operators believe that's been one of the main reasons the plant has struggled. Because instead of receiving a slow, steady flow of wastewater, which is how the treatment process works best, the plant has been getting these big surges all at once. So those surges would overwhelm parts of the system and then create a cascade of problems downstream in the plant. But since identifying that issue, they've installed temporary above ground EQ tanks, and the operators say those have made quite a difference. And the next step in fixing this problem is building a permanent underground EQ tank, which they think will be a great long term solution. And this feels to me like an important shift because they're no longer, just treating the symptoms of the issue, but finally they have an understanding of a root cause so they can treat the real sickness here.
And I don't want to do too much time looking back, but Claire, this is a faulty design problem, it sounds like, from the get go. Is that correct?
That's correct. This was something that they built into the original system, and it is absolutely a design flaw.
Okay. So the village also replaced the company operating the plant. Claire, how much of this turnaround that we're discussing is about better management versus new equipment?
Yeah, so just for a little history, in the years leading up to the plant's breakdown, the facility was operated by a private company called C3ND. And when the plant entered, crisis mode in early 2025, the village ended that contract and brought in the village engineer, Robert Flores, to stabilize operations and basically act as a temporary operator for several months while the village searched for a replacement. And then in August 2025, the village hired a company called H2O Innovation, which gradually transitioned into overseeing the plant last August before then taking over full operations earlier this year in January. And from talking with village officials and the current operators, it's pretty clear that they believe part of the plant's decline was the result of inadequate management and maintenance under the previous operator, C3ND. They say that some routine responsibilities weren't always being carried out, and equipment wasn't properly maintained, and some problems weren't being addressed early enough. I remember one of our daily catch investigations found that during part of the period when the plant was experiencing its worst violations, the chief operator was working without a valid wastewater operator certification, which is, of course, not good. But the current operators, H2O Innovation, as well as Flores before them, have taken a much more hands on approach. They're at the plant every day, twice a day, spending on average 4 to 5 hours there. They've done things like installed an alarm system that immediately notifies them if something goes wrong. And as I said, they just have a really detailed understanding of how this plant works, and that's helped build confidence from neighbors who live near the plant. But all that said, I don't think it's fair to say this turnaround is solely the result of changing operators. There were genuine infrastructure problems, which any operator was going to struggle with. But it certainly helps to have people there who are working hard and keeping a close eye on the plant.
That's great. And yet, Claire, even so, the plant has still had a handful of permit violations this year. Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, the plant has continued to have permit violations, and I think residents should view that as just a reminder that this is an imperfect plant. I don't think the operators expect that even after identifying many of the problems that we've talked about. The facility will never have another violation. For example, one of the operators explained that the plant recorded a temperature violation in June, which was partially because of the hot summer weather, but also because of the technology the plant uses. So the plant treats wastewater through this UV lamp, which also heats up the water because it's basically a light that it passes through. So I just don't think the operators would say that they expect to never see another violation. But they say, that they're much better equipped to handle them when they do come, identify what's causing them, and fix things before it becomes something worse or larger.
Hmm. So, Claire, do you think that residents should view these violations as warning signs, or is the fact that the current operator, understands them supposed to give us confidence that things are actually in control?
I think they absolutely are in control because they're keeping a close eye. But, again, it's a reminder that this is an imperfect plant and it's likely that it's not going to, always function perfectly because of the design issues that we've talked about.
Yeah, got it. Um, Claire, as I mentioned, I know Mayor Karen Smythe really wanted us to understand the turnaround. It can be very frustrating, I think, for government officials when media report on all the problems and don't report on the corrective actions taken. Point well made by the mayor. But tell us a little about what these improvements have meant to Mayor Smythe personally and as the leader of village government. What's her mood like now?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been one of the defining challenges of Mayor Smythe's tenure, as it would be for any mayor. I mean, having a failing sewer system while you have all these plans for housing development that are hinging on the plant's expansion is
Mhm.
not the position that any government official wants to find themselves in. A year ago, Smythe also faced significant criticism from residents, particularly neighbors of the plant who felt that the village hadn't been transparent enough about the extent of the problems or moved quickly enough to address them. And I think that strained a lot of her relationships with them. But she has since put a lot of work into fixing it. And I think that's really what she wants to highlight. And I think that's why she wants us to come back and see, she is really ready to move on and wants people to look ahead to a new chapter.
That's great. Well, stand by, Claire. I now want to turn over to Athan, our discussion about what's next. So, Athan, while you both have been reporting, you and Claire, on how the plant has improved, you reported and broke the news this week that the village may not move forward with a big expansion plan unless additional grants come through. Tell us what exactly village officials discussed.
Yeah, I just want to say first, great job, Claire, on that first half. That was really informative and great to listen to. So, Emily, to your question, it's important to know that the village didn't say that it may not move forward with expansion unless it gets additional grants. They said they will not move forward without additional grant money, which I think is something that we haven't heard village officials say outright yet. Maybe this is something that was obvious to people when looking at the estimated cost of phase two without grants, but it was certainly the first time that I heard the mayor, deputy mayor, and village engineer say that outright on the record. Why now or why Monday? It's not entirely clear, but certainly trustee Francis Uku, who forced the issue of the cost of phase two to be on the agenda, contributed to that statement. Now, what's interesting is the mayor told the Daily Catch on Monday, and she alluded to this in the meeting, that the village does not have a fixed amount or has not set an amount that it would feel comfortable charging residents for the expansion. So we just know that as it stands right now, they're not going to move forward. And they're not comfortable charging residents the 2,600 per year that the price currently would be. But it's up in the air how much they would actually be willing to charge their residents.
Excellent. So, and thanks for that correction. The word may is definitely different from will not, may not, and will not, very different. Athan, tell us why this expansion is considered so important. And maybe before you do that, give us a little bit of a sense of how big an expansion we're talking about. I think right now the plant processes 75 or is able to process 75,000 gallons a day, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong.
There's two plants actually. There's a plant that was used for the Red Hook Commons, which uh, was designed to process 25,000 gallons per day. And then there's the newer plant. And I know this lingo can be kind of confusing because we're talking about an old plant, a newer plant, and then the new plant. But the newer plant, which is currently in place, was designed to process 50,000 gallons. So a total of 75,000 gallons per day. The new plant that is being proposed is 300 gallons per day.
300,000.
300,000 gallons. So that would be 4 times 75,000 gallons.
Okay. And tell us why this expansion is considered so important, sort of in a holistic sense for both village and town.
Yeah. So, we talk about this as a sewer project, a sewer expansion, but it's really a development project, right? Because one of the central purposes of doing this is to allow for future business and housing developments in the village and in the town, because this is an intermunicipal project. The town has planned to use 50 to 60,000 gallons of wastewater in the village's proposed 300,000 gallon tank, so about a sixth of that capacity. And they've signed an intermunicipal agreement. So this is a joint project, and the town needs the new sewer plant for their traditional neighborhood district, which they want to encourage new development and business to be in that area as kind of a transitional neighborhood into the village's central business district. So again, this is not just a sewer project, it's a development project. And I think that's how people should be looking at this.
And when you're referencing that traditional neighborhood development district, you're talking about South Broadway as we head from South Broadway in the town up into the village. Is that correct, Athan?
Yes. So I think of it, the way that I like to think of it is Town Hall to just south of Hannaford. I think that's roughly the boundaries of the T&D, if that helps anybody.
Okay. So let's get more specific, Athan. Tell us about all the projects that hang in the balance that need the expansion. And maybe just to make it geographically simple, you can start at the northernmost end and walk us south down Route 9, explaining where the different projects are.
Of course, that actually makes it very easy. So there's really 3 main projects in the village. And the first is, as you said, at the far northern end of the village, Cookingham East. And that is also known as the Rupco project, which promises to bring a combination of 40 workforce and single family housing units. And I believe that's on a 12-acre land plot that Rupco currently owns. Then just south of that is the Ross property, which is owned by James Ross. That's a 7-acre property. And there is planned 40 market rate housing units. Then further south in the village's southeast corner is the planned Anderson Commons unit housing development, which has been kind of 10 years in the making. And there they plan to build 51 residential units and also have 1 commercial building. And then as we kind of make our way south, we also have the hotel development that Town Supervisor Robert McKeon has touted at various events, that he hopes to get a brand new hotel just south of Hannaford. And so that would need the sewer system as well.
It's really mind-boggling to think about all these projects, right? Before I ask you what's going to happen to them, there also, Athan, correct me if I'm wrong, are a number of individual homes that would be moved onto the district. Is that correct? Onto the sewer system?
Yes, there's about 170 parcels that would be added onto the district. Because remember that the village's long-term plan is to provide centralized sewer for the entire village. And so they've decided that 70 parcels is kind of a good midway point, or a good intermediary phase before they decide to go forward with phase three and connect the entire village's properties to the centralized sewer system. But yes, this would also fall on single family houses, which is partly why there's so much concern about the cost of this project, because right now sewer users pay about 1,300 per year for their sewer. And as it currently stands, the average single family homeowner in the new district would pay 2,600, so almost double that.
Mhm.
So that's certainly a concern to these homeowners in the new sewer district.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the financials. So the numbers are pretty staggering. I know you and I had an offline conversation, Athan, this week where you walked me through the numbers and my jaw was dropping, actually. Tell us what the cost of the whole expansion would be and explain how officials have been hoping to pay for it.
Yeah, this is very fun. So the project is estimated to cost 27.8 million. It was previously set at 19.5 million in 2024. Now it's estimated to be 27.8 million, and that's due to just some inflationary costs, the cost of, you know, uh, equipment going up, uh, but also some additional elements to the project, including solar panels to reduce electricity costs and the addition of a septage receiving station, which has gained some controversy. But so without any grants, it would cost the average single family household in the village 3,200 or more like $3,300
Per year.
per year. Uh, it's important to remember that some single family households would actually have to pay more than that, because the way that the village calculates sewer costs, it's based on water usage. And so some single family homes currently are designated to EDU units, which is essentially the unit that the village uses to calculate how much you need to pay in sewer costs. So some individual families would have to pay 6,400 per year, which is just staggering. But so to offset that cost, the village plans on applying for grants. And as it stands right now, the village has $5.3 million, with 2.5 million awarded in grant money and 2.8 million pledged from the town to use the sewer system. Now, that amount from the town could be more if the village does some hardball negotiations with the town, but for all intents and purposes, we're putting the number at 5.3 million, which the village currently has.
Mm-hmm.
As I said earlier, that would bring the annual cost for sewer district residents to about 2,600 per year.
Okay. And so we're talking about, just to keep everybody caught up with the math, you said the total cost would be 27.8 million.
27.8 million.
0.8 minus, you said how much? 5 point something?
5.3 million.
Okay. So, my little 27.8 minus 5.3 leaves us with $22.5 million. Where was the rest of that going to come from?
That's the village is hoping comes from grants.
More grants.
More grants. More grants.
Mhm.
Grants. The village currently has applied for two major grants: an intermunicipal grant, which accounts for 40% of the village's share of their project cost, which right now would be 9.4 million, and then a water quality improvement grant, which is up to $10 million.
So even that doesn't, if they get both of them, even that doesn't get us all the way there.
Doesn't get the village all the way there, but it would significantly reduce the
Okay.
cost per user. And based on the numbers provided in the engineering report,
Mhm.
that would cost if they got both grants, it would be about $427 per year for the average single family homeowner.
Which is palatable, right? They must feel that's palatable. And
It's significantly less than what the current sewer user pays.
okay, good. So how optimistic are officials that they will receive these two large grants that you just mentioned?
So the IMG grant, the village has been very optimistic that they will get for two reasons. One, in private conversations with the EFC, the Environmental Facilities Corporation, they feel like they've been given assurances that their project aligns with the state goals of building more housing development, and that they're going to be kind of shepherded into receiving this grant. The second reason is that the town actually applied for this grant last year and received it. But as we've reported, it was then taken away because it was found that the town had a faulty application. So the logic there is the town got it when they applied, and prior to the EFC discovering this flaw in the town's application, they were okay giving it to them. So reapplying with the correct application, the village and town believe they'll be able to get it.
Okay.
Was that too confusing?
That was not confusing. So here's where I land, and I think where our readers are going to wonder too. What happens there's two scenarios. What happens if they don't get either of these grants? And what happens if they get, let's say, one of the big ones, but not the other one? What is the calculation? What is the triage system that they're going to go through to figure out whether anything can be built?
Right. So if they get the IMG grant and do not get the water quality improvement grant, which they're less optimistic about, it would reduce the annual cost to about $1,600, which is a lot, but is manageable. The village will have to make a decision if they get there. But in terms of what they are going to do going forward if they get no grants, well, the village mayor, Karen Smythe, has said that they're going to continue to apply to grants and more grants. But as we've said, there's developments that are relying on this, so they can't take forever. If they get to that point where they're like, okay, we don't have more money, we're not going to get more money, and we have to make a decision, the mayor has said that they will look into reducing the size of their expansion. Now, what that would look like and the specifics of what that would be, the mayor was not able to give me. And the village has not collectively decided. Now, it's worth noting that if you reduce the size of the expansion, so you incorporate less properties into the expansion, you're going to have less EDUs. And if you have less EDUs, it means that each individual homeowner or each individual parcel owner will have to take on a higher percentage of the project costs. So it is a little bit of a balancing act that the village will have to do if they don't get additional money.
I'm just going to ask one more technical question before we bring Claire back in. Athan, could these projects, each of the ones you described, go forward with septic systems like the Rupco project? Could it just, they say, fine, we won't get a sewer, we'll put a septic in instead so our project can go forward?
That's a question that nobody has been able to answer clearly. It seems like that would be what they would explore if it seemed like the phase 2 was in severe jeopardy. I don't think certainly they want to do that. I think they'd rather have a centralized sewer system, but it's not clear whether they would decide, you know what, we'll take the project elsewhere and do the affordable housing project in a different location, or they would, as you said, try to build their own septic system and go forward that way.
Yeah. Very good analysis. Thank you. I think stepping it through in this way is really helpful. It's really helpful for me, which probably means it's really helpful for other people. So thank you for that. So bringing you both back in together, I'd like to ask each of you to sort of handicap where we are. Where do you think this story stands today? Is the biggest issue behind us? Is the biggest issue ahead of us? Claire, what's your assessment of where we are with the sewer?
I think that's a good question. I'll say that I think once they have the new EQ tank in place, the plant will be in a much stronger position. That said, one thing I think that we've learned is that things can change quickly, even when it seems like everything is going well. Something can come up and conditions can shift. So while it seems like there's a lot more confidence from people in the community about the way the plant is operating now, I don't think we should take that for granted. And we have some major challenges now lying ahead. And I think really what it ultimately depends on is if the village is going to be able to secure funding for expansion. And that is the next big challenge that the village has to face.
Yeah. So Athan, to you now, what's your sense of what's going to happen next?
Well, I'll just say I agree with Claire that there's no doubt that they've turned a corner in terms of current operations, and they've made significant improvement, which is a really significant accomplishment. But now the biggest hurdle is finances, and another hurdle, which is maybe less logistical, but is certainly there, is public perception. That is going to continue to be a difficult hurdle for the village to mount, because it wasn't that long ago that this current plant was in dire condition, if that's the right word. And the mayor has said that that was due to the plant not being set up correctly, and that if we do this new plant, it will be set up correctly and it will work properly, which I believe is sincere, and I believe the village will do everything they can to have this new plant if they end up building it set up correctly. But the problem is, how do you ensure users that what you say will happen will actually happen, especially because this project is on a much larger scale, and current sewer users have been on this roller coaster, not just with operations, but also price and cost. They saw their bill go up by 110% just early this year. So there's going to be a long road ahead in terms of changing the public perception on this project.
Yeah. And we didn't talk about it now, and we'll save this for another day, but there's also still opposition from the Sawkill Tributary Coalition to even there being another big plant, right? So there's a lot of roads to hoe.
And in March 2027, there's 3 seats up for grabs in the village board, which has the potential to shape the way it thinks about phase 2.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. Well, our listeners and our readers can count on us to follow it through, all the way through. And thank you to both of you so much, as always, for keeping us informed and for coming on the show. Thank you.
Thanks for having us. It was fun.
Pleasure as always.
And that concludes the catch-up for this week. Thanks to Maddie Rosenberg, Jen Hammoud, and Esther Martell at our partner, Radio Free Rhinecliff, for their help in producing this episode. We'll see you next time.